Okay. Well, welcome to the presentation this morning, this two-part series that we're doing with University of Arkansas Currents. My name is Dr. Robert Stevens, and I am an assistant professor of rehabilitation sciences at Arkansas Tech University in Russellville, Arkansas. And one of my areas of research is working with the LGBTQ plus community. I have been a vocational rehab counselor since 2003, and I've had my CRC since then. I was able to get my LPC as well while I was working on my PhD while I was living in the state of Ohio, and I am an LPC here in the state of Arkansas as well. I have worked in developmental disabilities, I have worked in addictions, I've worked in mental health, and now I am full-time tenure track professor. When I was approached to possibly do a webinar on this, I thought that was a wonderful idea, because when I have presented on this topic at Arkansas Rehab Association Conference, at Arkansas Counseling Association Conference, and even at a couple of national conferences, a lot of vocational rehab counselors and other counselors have a lot of questions. So I want this to be very informal. I want you to ask questions if you have questions. I want us to just kind of have a dialogue instead of me just lecturing at you for an hour and a half. So if you have questions, please ask. And as you'll see on, I think, the next slide, this is some of the goals of the presentation. We're going to look at some common terminology, make sure that we're clear on some of that terminology. We're going to look at some of the history of the LGBTQ plus rights movement. If you happen to have previewed the slides, there's a lot of information there. We're not going to be able to cover all of that, but we're going to hit some of the major highlights. That way you know more about the history of LGBTQ plus rights. And then we'll look at some best practices when working with LGBTQ plus clients. So I have a few, I call them rules of the presentation, but again, this is very laid back. Be respectful. Not everybody's going to share the same viewpoints, and that's okay. Please ask questions, like I already said. There's no silly questions in any of my, I tell my students all the time, there's no silly question. If you don't ask, then you're not going to know. So if you have a question, please ask. No judgments, no silly questions. And then the key with this is hopefully you will leave this presentation with more knowledge and resources than you came with. That's the goal. That's my goal in any class, any presentation that I do, is that I add something to your toolbox, your counseling toolbox, that you didn't have before. And this last thing is the most important. I'm not here to change your moral beliefs, your values, your family beliefs. Like, that's not my job. My job today is to help you work with clients that may come to you that identify as LGBTQ+, and you to meet them where you are. It's our duty as a CRC or any counselor that is licensed or certified to do no harm. It's built into our ethical code. So if you don't feel competent to work with that client because you're uneducated, then that's why you're here. Most likely, you're here to become more knowledgeable. So that way, if you do have a client that gets on your caseload or comes into your office needing to talk to you and says, hey, I happen to be a lesbian that also has a disability, there's a lot of things going on there. And we'll talk about some of the assumptions you shouldn't make as well throughout this presentation. All right, so I left this slide in there, but then I kind of broke it out a little bit too. There's a lot of common terms, and this is not an exhaustive list of common terms, but there's a lot of common terms of LGBTQ plus terminology. I am mostly kind of focusing this part of the presentation on all of the letters except for T for transgender, because part 2 of this series is going to be with Noah Meeks, and he is going to talk extensively about transgender issues and working with people who identify as transgender. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that today, but we will briefly touch on a few things with the transgender population. So let's look at some basic terminology. And again, if you have a question, you can do the raise hand thing, or you can just speak if you want to, and we'll talk about it. keep forgetting that I have to push the arrow up here. All right. So some of these pretty self-explanatory. Gay, someone who is attracted to those of the same gender. So a lot of times people make the assumption that gay means gay man. It very well could be, but there are other people in the LGBTQ plus community that may also call themselves gay. Like to women, for instance, they may just say, yeah, I'm gay, instead of saying, yeah, I'm a lesbian. So gay is kind of an umbrella term, but then also specifically about a man that is attracted to another man. Lesbian is a woman who is sexually attracted to another woman. Bisexual, someone who is attracted to those of their same gender as well as those of different gender. So a woman may be attracted to both women and men, and they may date a woman this time, and then when that relationship doesn't work out, they may date a man the next time. They're equally attracted to both sexes. Transgender, someone whose gender identity differs from the one that was assigned to them at birth. So we're all assigned a gender at birth. And for some people that identify as transgender, that's not how they psychologically identify. And again, I'm going to let Noah explain that better tomorrow. And then we have cisgender. Some of you hopefully have heard this term before. Cisgender is a person whose gender identity matches their gender that they were assigned at birth. So for instance, I am a cisgendered male. I was assigned male at birth, and I identify biologically and psychologically as a male. So that is a term that is gaining a lot more popularity, especially when you're working with the LGBTQ plus community. It lets people in the LGBTQ plus community know that you understand the difference between cisgender and transgender when you say I am a cisgender male. And to me, one thing I forgot to mention in the beginning, I'm also the faculty advisor for our LGBTQ plus student group called Spectrum here at Arkansas Tech University. And as the faculty advisor, my main role is just to help them make sure that their student organization is successful, help them with problem solving, things like that, but I kind of let them run the show. That's one thing that works very well with them, is because they understand that I may not can put myself in their shoes of being a transgender person, but as a cisgender person, I have at least the basic understanding. And so I get a lot of compliments from students of, thank goodness you're educated. We've had so many faculty advisors before that weren't. Any questions so far? Okay, those are all pretty self-explanatory. Some of the ones that's going to be coming up may not be. So queer. This is a term depending on the age range of people in the LGBTQ plus community. They may not like this word, or they may be very fond of this word. People of the older generation remember this word being used in a very negative and derogatory way. People in the younger generation, though, especially a lot of my current students, they actually will use this word in a positive way. There's been a wave of people that are trying to reclaim this word and trying to make it more of about a positive way of describing the community as a whole, the LGBTQ plus community as a whole. So the definition there, particularly youth are starting to use this term to describe themselves and or their community. So you might hear somebody say, I'm part of the queer community. And as I said, it's being reclaimed from previous negative use. The Q in LGBTQ plus can also stand for questioning. A lot of times when people are not sure exactly what their sexuality is or what their gender identity is, they may be falling into what we call the questioning category. So it's people that are exploring their sexual orientation or gender identity. They're not ready to come out and say, yes, I am a gay man, or I am a transgendered woman. They're not ready to do that yet, but they're thinking about it. They know it's something about their sexuality or their gender identity, but they're not ready to be out and proud about that yet. Pansexual. This one confuses a lot of people, and it's a newer term too. It's been around for a long time, but it's really got more in the mainstream in the 90s and the 2000s, all the way up until today. So it's someone who's attracted to people of any and all genders. So someone that is pansexual, they really don't care about what is between the person's legs. They care more about the person as a person. So they might date someone who is trans, and then when that relationship fizzles out, they may date a biological male next, and then they may date a biological female. It's not about the gender. It is more about the emotional and the physical attraction to that person, just because of the person that they are. And then the last one here is intersex. There used to be a term called hermaphrodite. We don't use that terminology anymore. A lot of people that have been born as intersex prefer to use the term intersex now. So the term intersex is someone who, due to a variety of factors, has a reproductive or sexual anatomy that doesn't fit the typical definition for the female or male sex at birth. So for instance, we may have a child that is born with a vagina, but also has testes. Or we may have very unclear genitalia when a child is born. When that happens, a lot of times the way it is in the United States and in many countries around the world, a doctor gives the parents a choice of, it looks like functionality-wise, the female genitalia is what is going to be more functional than what little bit of male genitalia is here. We would like to go ahead and do a surgery and go ahead and correct that. Some parents go ahead and do that very young. Other parents choose not to until they kind of see what the gender expression is going to be of their child. Again, it's a choice for the parents. The child is so young, they are too young to make a decision like that. There's a lot of controversy in the LGBTQ plus community, though, about this. There has been some people that identify as intersex that say, I wish my parents wouldn't have made that decision until I was old enough to make that decision. There's a video that I can share if anybody needs more information about this, of interviewing people that are intersex, and several of them saying, I'm very happy that my parents left me the way that I was born. Yes, it is hard to explain to a potential partner that I'm going to be intimate with, but I feel like it's part of me. It's the way that I was made, and I don't want to have that removed unless there was some medical reason why I would have to. I have not worked with very many people that identify as intersex. A lot of people live very privately and don't really talk about that with a counselor, for instance, because it doesn't really affect the way that they would be able to go to work. They probably present as the gender that they are more comfortable presenting with when they walk into your office, and you're probably not going to know that they are even a person that identifies as intersex unless they disclose that. Any questions about any of these? Comments?
I don't have a question, but I would like to have some information on the video, please.
Okay.
This is Tanya. Thanks.
I will make sure that I send that out. I'll just go ahead and send it out to everybody that attended. I'm sure Kevin can help me do that to make sure everybody has that. There's actually, with this website, I can't remember if I put it in the references or not, but it is a glossary of terms, and underneath every definition, it has like a YouTube video attached to it, and underneath the definition of intersex, it has that video that I'm talking about. So I'll be glad to share that if it's not on the reference slide already. So be more than happy to do that. Anything else before we move on? Okay, let's move forward then. Ally. Ally is someone who supports the LGBTQ plus community, but they may not actually identify as LGBTQ plus. So an ally would be someone that is straight, cisgender, but they are very supportive of their clients. They're very supportive of the LGBTQ plus community. So they might vote for civil rights. They might go and march in a pride parade to show their support as an ally. One thing that's really cool that we see a lot nowadays is there are moms and dads that come and wear t-shirts at like pride parades that say free mom hugs, free dad hugs. Those are people that are allies to the community. They come to show that love to individuals that identify as LGBTQ+ that may not have that healthy relationship with their family. And we'll talk a little bit about that today as well. Asexual. This is someone who really doesn't focus their life on the sexual attraction to other people. So they don't experience very much sexual attraction at all. And when they do experience attraction, they don't necessarily feel the need to act out sexually. I have worked with a student recently that identifies as asexual, and I have learned so much about this because of conversations that I've been able to have with that student. This student just does not feel that anyone should be able to share any kind of sexual intimacy with him or her. For confidentiality reasons, I want to identify a gender, because that's just the way that they were brought up. And so it's why they identify as asexual. They have no desire to have any kind of any type of intimacy at this time in their life. Now, will they stay that way their whole life? Maybe so. It's a personal choice. It is a way that they identify. Coming out. A lot of people probably heard this term before. That's the process where people start to accept their sexual orientation or gender identity, and they start to share that sexual orientation or gender identity with other people. So they start to tell people at work, they start to tell people at school, they start to tell their family and their friends who they are as a person. And non-binary, I think that Noah will speak a lot more on this tomorrow, but non-binary, I'm getting tongue-tied all of a sudden, is an adjective describing a person who does not identify exclusively as a man or a woman. So people that identify as non-binary may identify as being both male and female, somewhere in between, or falling completely outside of that category altogether. While many of these people that identify as non-binary also identify as transgender, that doesn't have to be the case. I have a student that the way they identify is non-binary lesbian. While that is confusing to me, it makes perfect sense to them. And so, again, I don't pass judgments. That's the way they identify. I accept that student the way that they identify, because that is how it's comfortable for them, and that's how they express themselves. So again, I think Noah will go more into non-binary with the transgender slides tomorrow. Questions about any of these? Okay. So I left this in there because I love this slide. It's called the gender unicorn. Have any of y'all seen this before or heard about the gender unicorn before?
I haven't.
Okay. The gender unicorn just helps us understand that all of these different things or identities are on a continuum. So for instance, gender identity, it's on a continuum for a lot of people. So female, male, or other gender. Somebody may fall in between, or like we were just talking about with non-binary. Gender expression, feminine, masculine, or other. Sex assigned at birth, female, male, or intersex. Physically attracted to, women, men, other genders. And then emotionally attracted to, women, men, other genders. So it just shows on this that all this can be in at a continuum. So I'll give you an example. So we may have somebody that their gender identity is female, but their gender expression, it kind of falls in between female and masculine, kind of halfway in between. Some days they present more as a jeans and t-shirt kind of girl, and other days they, dress up to the nines. They're in their makeup and their hair is all fixed, and they're wearing really professional feminine clothes. They were assigned female at birth, They're physically attracted to all genders. So gender identity is female, but she also identifies as pansexual. And emotionally attracted to, she's attracted to all genders. So again, it falls on this continuum. And this is put out through the Trans Student Educational Resources, and they have a whole lot of other stuff on this. It has the website underneath the little gender unicorn figure there, where you can go and look at some of the other resources with this. Again, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because I'm kind of encroaching on Noah's information tomorrow, but I wanted to leave this in there because of the fact that it's just a really good. Noah, you have a question or a comment?
Well, no, you did a great job with that. I was just going to emphasize the importance that these things are separate. Like when I transitioned, people would ask me if I transitioned because I was attracted to women,
Yeah.
and I had to explain to them, no, I'm transitioning because I am a man.
Right.
And we'll get in, like you say, more into that tomorrow. But
yeah, and I think Noah makes a good point there. Never ever make assumptions when it comes to people with any of these. Their gender identity, their gender expression, they're emotionally or physically attracted to, because things change. I've seen that so much working with the student group. I have had a student, we're going to talk about pronouns here in a minute, but I've had a student, I have known her for 2 years now, and I have had every semester pretty much had to change what pronouns I use for her, because she's still trying to figure it out. She's still trying to figure out who she really is. Right now, the appropriate pronoun for her is she. But 2 semesters ago, we were all calling her they. And 3 semesters ago, she wanted to be called it. So again, respect the client with what they want to be called. And I'm kind of jumping the gun here with what we're going to talk about next with pronouns. But this is a continuum. And again, don't make, like Noah was saying, don't make assumptions. Just because someone identifies differently doesn't necessarily mean that, like Noah was saying, he transitioned because he was a man. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he wants to be with one particular gender. You can't make that assumption. Only Noah knows who he is attracted to. So don't make that assumption. And that's where a lot of times counselors make that mistake. Oh, okay, well, you're transitioning, so you must be wanting to be with the same sex, or you're transitioning because you want to be with the opposite sex. Don't make those assumptions. A lot of times, and Noah, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of times, with my experiences with my clients and with my students, they don't mind you asking questions. They would rather you ask questions instead of make an assumption, because of the fact that way they feel respected. Noah, do you have anything about that?
I would agree, but with the qualification that you should start by asking if it's okay to ask questions.
Permission?
Yeah, particularly with transgender people. I mean, we get asked a lot of really invasive personal questions.
Yeah, and I know you're going to talk about that tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never ever ask very personal questions. Always keep it more on the surface level. And let's just move into the next thing, which is an appropriate thing to ask, which is about pronouns. With pronouns, the main takeaway here is be respectful to your client. Ask your client if you're not sure what pronouns they use. I have yet to have anybody get offended when I've asked them what pronouns they prefer. The people that I've worked with, either through Spectrum or clients, instead of making the assumption and calling this person the wrong pronoun. So our masculine pronouns are he, him, his. Those are the pronouns that I use as a cisgender male. Feminine pronouns, she, her, hers. And then we have some non-binary pronouns. They, them, theirs are the most common. But there are other variations, and I didn't put them all on the screen, but another variation is Z, Zer, and Zers. But my experience, as I said, as a professor and also working in the field, I have yet to have anybody get offended because I asked, hey, could you clarify what pronoun I should use? Instead of just making the assumption, okay, this person appears to look very masculine, I'm going to say he. No, that was the wrong pronoun. I should have said they. Any questions about pronouns? Because a lot of people have trouble with this. Y'all are quiet this morning. I know it's Monday morning. Okay. Well, if there's no questions, we'll move on. But the biggest takeaway with this is just be respectful and don't make assumptions. All right, and I already asked that. So there's no questions so far about anything we've covered so far, because we're kind of transitioning now away from the terminology, and we're going to start talking a little bit about the history. Okay. Again, with these history slides, I have a lot of information on here, so we're not going to talk about just every bit of detail here. But I do want to hit on some highlights, because I feel like the more you know about the history of the LGBTQ rights movement, the more you will understand how to relate better to clients that identify as LGBTQ+. And the history goes back before 1924. This is mostly just history from the United States. I teach a class here at Arkansas Tech called Working with LGBTQ+ Clients. And the textbook that I have takes it back to before BC times and comes all the way forward. So I think I have that listed as well in the resources. It is a really good book. The first couple of chapters can be a little hard to read about some of the early history of how horribly people that identified as LGBTQ+ were treated, mainly being stoned to death, killed because of their sexuality. So a lot of my students really struggle with seeing that history since they've never heard it before. So we have come a long way, but we have a long way to come still with some of the LGBTQ+ rights. So one of the first things in the United States that I want to just mention is in 1924, Henry Gerber in Chicago developed the Society for Human Rights. It was one of the first conversations and organized groups in the United States that helped to try to get the conversation started of why is it okay for LGBTQ+ people to be discriminated against and treated as outcasts like they were. Alfred Kinsey's study on sexuality in 1948 changed a lot of things. If any of you know anything about his study, he said he's one of the first ones in America that said that sexuality is on a continuum. So either you are heterosexual, homosexual, or you fall somewhere in between. And there's a scale from 1 to 10 of where you might score if you had done his survey. There was a lot of controversy, though, because some people feel that he didn't follow the scientific method when he did his random surveys to get volunteers to be in the study. But still, to this day, Kinsey's work is referred to as some of the first in the United States. 1950, the Machete Society, Henry Hay, it was one of the first gay rights groups formed. Let's see, what else do we need to talk about for sure? The Daughter of Billets in 55, Del Martin and Phyllis Lyon, they were one of the first lesbian rights groups in San Francisco. Back in the 50s, a lot of the groups were very separated. So we had gay rights groups, we had lesbian rights groups, we had bisexual rights groups. They all hadn't figured out yet that, hey, maybe we all need to come together as a community and all advocate together as one voice instead of all these separate little voices. If you're not aware of sodomy laws were pretty much all 50 states had sodomy laws at one time, where it was a criminal offense for two men to have any type of homosexual intimate relations together. And in 1961, Illinois was the first state to decriminalize homosexuality by getting rid of their sodomy law. I didn't check before this presentation, but Arkansas, where we live, or where I live, still has a sodomy law on the books. It's just not enforced anymore. So a lot of states still have them on the books, but you don't hear as much now of people enforcing them like they used to be. So hopefully some of you have heard about Stonewall and the Stonewall riots. Last year was the 50th anniversary of Stonewall. So back in the 50s and 60s, as I was saying, a lot of LGBTQ plus nightclubs, bars, things of that nature were raided by the police on a frequent basis. And people were arrested and taken to jail for breaking the law of being cross-dressers, or for being two gay men sitting together drinking at the bar was considered a lewd act. The laws were not very clear, they were very vague. And so police raided the bars on a regular basis. And Stonewall is in New York City, and it was raided on a regular basis. But at that time, gay bars and nightclubs like that supported the LGBT community was one of the few places that LGBTQ plus people felt like they could go and socialize with other LGBTQ plus people. So on June 28, 1969, the police raided the Stonewall Inn, and a riot broke out. Two women that we'll talk about here in a minute started this riot. Enough was enough. They were tired of this happening to them. And these riots and protests lasted for 6 days in New York City. As more people heard about what had happened, more people joined the fight. For a lot of people in the LGBTQ plus community, we consider this the catalyst to the gay rights movement moving forward. A lot of you have probably heard of pride festivals in your towns or in bigger cities close to you. And usually they happen in the summertime, but some like Atlanta has theirs in September. But June is the typical month where a lot of communities will do their pride festivals. Due to COVID-19, of course, a lot of them are getting canceled this year for the health and safety of having big groups like that. It's not advised right now. So a lot of prides are getting canceled or rescheduled for this year. But Pride was born in 1970 as a result of the Stonewall riots, and it was originally called the Christopher Street Liberation Day. Stonewall Inn is on Christopher Street in Lower Manhattan. And every year since then, New York City has had a Pride Parade on or around June 28th of each month. June 28th doesn't always fall on a weekend, as we all know, so they try to get it as close to that date as possible. So there's two transgender women of color. Back then, they were both called drag queens or cross-dressers, but in today's society, we would probably have called them transgender women, the more information that we've learned about Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Riviera. They are credited as the two people that were the first people to fight back during the Stonewall riots. As I said, they were known as drag queens or transvestites back then. Transvestites is not a term that we use as much anymore. But they also self-identified as women, and they lived most of their day dressed as women. So that's why I'm saying I would consider them as transgender women of color in today's society. Marsha P. Johnson was African American, and Sylvia Riviera was a Latinx. Transgender women of color were and still are often excluded from both the gay rights and the women's rights movement. So this is still an issue, and I'm sure Noah will talk about this some tomorrow as well, of how a lot of transgender people do not feel that they're included. So Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Riviera both were big pillars of the Stonewall riots and the start of the organized LGBTQ plus movement. There is a documentary on, I think it's on Netflix, about Marsha P. Johnson that's really good if you're interested in learning more about that. And Sylvia Riviera, there's a lot of information out there about them. They have both passed away. They're not with us any longer. but they are still considered icons. And there will be I don't think it's been installed yet, but they have President Obama named Stonewall in a national monument. And somewhere around that, or the triangle park that sits right out front of Stonewall they're going to build a monument shrine, statues of Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera in tribute to those two transgendered women of color. Any questions about Stonewall? Okay. And as I said, all of this that happened at Stonewall has developed into pride festivals across the country. A lot of our bigger metropolitan cities have pride festivals. I know one person that joined us by our phone said that they are from Texas. Texas, a lot of the big cities in Texas, Dallas, San Antonio, Houston, I know they all have huge pride festivals. Here in Arkansas, we have a large one in Northwest Arkansas called Northwest Arkansas Pride. Again, as I said, it got canceled this year and rescheduled for August tentatively, depending on how things continue with COVID-19. And then Little Rock also has started one, our capital city, and it is held in October of every year. And it is getting larger as it goes. Pride festivals are welcome to everyone, so allies can go to Pride if they so choose. It's a lot of fun if you've ever been to one, or if you haven't been. It's just a really awesome celebration of social justice and pride. A little bit more history. In 73, Lambda Legal was formed, and it was one of the first legal organizations for LGBTQ plus equality and advocacy, and it is still alive and well today. In 1973, so that's not that long ago if you really think about it, the American Psychological Association removed homosexuality as a mental health diagnosis. This was a huge step forward for the LGBTQ plus community, because of the fact that now all of these people that tried to use this as a mental health diagnosis as a way to discriminate against people in the LGBTQ plus community, they didn't have that anymore. And there's all the treatment for homosexuality that was ridiculous if you look back into the history, was shown that it was more harmful than good, and was recommended to be stopped. In 74, we had our first people elected to public office. City Council in Michigan and the Massachusetts State Legislature in Massachusetts. In 77 through 81, Billy Crystal played the first openly gay character in primetime television. It was a nighttime soap that he was on. And as I said, it was one of the first times we had ever seen a gay character played on television. So that was a huge step forward. Noah, you have input?
Since you mentioned sodomy laws and Lambda Legal, that reminded me, and I probably wouldn't remember this except I was just talking to somebody about it last night. I was an intern for Dyke TV, which was a public access TV station in Brooklyn, New York, in 2002. And I actually helped with a segment, we're here in Arkansas, about the legal case that Lambda Legal handled that overturned sodomy laws in Arkansas.
Wow. That's awesome.
That happened in March of 2001.
Okay. Yeah, like I said, it's still on the books, but it is not enforced anymore from what I understand because of what Noah's talking about. They ruled it as not legal, but if you still look it up, it still says that you can still find the actual law of how it was written. So that's interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Noah. All right, any other questions or comments so far? All right. Harvey Milk, another very huge influential person in the LGBTQ rights movement. In 1978, he was elected as a city supervisor in San Francisco. Again, not very many openly gay men or LGBTQ plus people had been elected to office at this time. Unfortunately, his term was very short. In November of 1978, Dan White murdered Harvey Milk and Mayor George Moscone in the City Hall building. White only served 5 years in prison for voluntary manslaughter. Harvey was looked as a leader by many people in the LGBTQ plus community because of the fact that he was so out and proud, and wanted to not only advocate for other LGBTQ plus people, but he was huge on advocating for people in low socioeconomic status, for people in other cultural backgrounds that were also being discriminated against. So people that were African American, people that were Latinx, all of the different immigrants that had moved to San Francisco to make a good life for themselves. He wanted to help them too. So Harvey was very influential in the short time that he had of his political career. He had ran multiple times before 1978 and had lost. So this was a huge step up in his career, and unfortunately it was so short. Sean Penn played Harvey Milk in the film Milk. Some of you may have seen that, and it kind of gives a look into the life and times of Harvey Milk. It's a very good film if you have time to watch it. The gay pride flag. It was created in 1978 by Gilbert Baker. And one thing that I didn't have time to put in the slides, there are a ton of flags that represent the LGBTQ plus community. But the gay pride flag is kind of the umbrella flag that represents everybody. So it's a symbol of pride and hope for the community. Each color of the flag has a meaning. And there actually was 2 additional colors in the original design. And if you go to the Gilbert Baker estate, you can actually see the original pride flag, or if you search for original pride flag, you can see his original design. Pink and turquoise were originally part of the flag, but removed due to production purposes. Those 2 colors were not easily found and manufactured in 1978, so they took them off the flag before it went into final production. According to his estate, Gilbert Baker's estate, pink was for sex, which again, that one was removed. Red is for life. Orange is for healing. Yellow for sunlight. Green for nature. Turquoise for magic. That one was removed. Indigo for harmony, and violet for spirit. So a lot of students, when I've taught this, and a lot of people when I've done presentations before, they're like, I had no idea that all the different colors meant something. I just thought that it was a rainbow of colors because the community is a rainbow of different kinds of people that are part of it. But there was a lot of meaning behind the design of the flag. And especially in June, you'll see more of the gay pride flags being flown around the country. If you ever get to visit San Francisco and you go down into the Castro district, which is what some people refer to as the gayborhood or neighborhood, there is a humongous gay pride flag that is flying 24/7 to represent the LGBTQ plus community of San Francisco. All right. Again, we're not going to talk about each one of these. Huge step forward. 1979, first National March on Washington for Lesbian and Gay Rights took place. That had been unheard of before, that a group of LGBTQ plus people would all get together and march together like that. In 82, Wisconsin was the first one to outlaw discrimination based on sexual orientation. So that was a huge step forward, the first state of the 50 states to do that. In 1980s, though, the AIDS epidemic hit and caused a lot of fear about the LGBTQ plus community, especially gay men. Gay men were blamed for the sole cause and spread of HIV and AIDS. If you've done any research, know anything about HIV and AIDS, you know that HIV and AIDS does not discriminate. Yes, it was more popular or more prevalent in the gay men population in the 80s because of the uneducation of how it was spread. There was a lot of unprotected sex going on in the gay male community at that time, and they did not realize until it was almost too late. Well, it was too late for a lot of people. Unfortunately, a lot of people lost their life due to contracting HIV and it going into full-blown AIDS. Now we have a lot more education about that. We have a lot more ways to try to prevent that by having safe intercourse, not sharing needles if people are doing drugs intravenously. And also we have medications that can prolong the lifespan of people that are diagnosed with HIV and AIDS. And we also have a medication that helps prevent it as well. Again, none of these methods are 100% though, and that's one thing that I talk with my students and former clients about. There's no 100% guarantee of protection with a virus like HIV and AIDS, so you have to practice safe protocol when you are doing risky behaviors. In 1993, Bill Clinton signs the Don't Ask, Don't Tell in the military. That caused a lot of, while a lot of people feel like it was in good intentions, it actually caused a lot of problems. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. And in 1995, Hate Crime Sentencing Enhancement Act was enforced or passed. This was actually a good thing for the LGBTQ plus community as well as other minority groups, because it said that if a person can be convicted of a targeted hate crime due to race, color, religion, national origin, ethnicity, gender, disability, or sexual orientation, then there would be harsher sentences upon those people that did those type of crimes. So this was a big step forward for the LGBTQ plus community, because they did not, before that, have any protections when it came to being any type of hate crimes. The laws have gotten even better since then, unfortunately due to some very sad circumstances that we're going to talk about. I'm trying to be cognizant on time because I want to make sure I leave enough time for part 3. So we all know marriage equality has passed in America now, that anybody of any sexual orientation or gender expression can file for a marriage certificate or marriage license and be married in the United States. So I'm not going to go through all of this again, but the big pieces of legislation down there at the bottom, 2013 U.S. versus Windsor, is where part of the Defense of Marriage Act was struck down, and then in 2015 the Supreme Court passed it 5-4 that all people can be married if they so choose. Let's see. A lot of people know Ellen DeGeneres. She was one of the first lesbians to come out in Time magazine in 1997. 1998. This is one of the things that I was talking about that will lead to stronger hate crime legislation. Matthew Shepard was an openly gay male living in Wyoming. He met Russell Henderson and Aaron McKinney in a gay bar. Was offered a ride home, or we really don't know the whole story, but basically he left the bar with these two gentlemen. These two gentlemen took him out in the middle of the wilderness in Wyoming and beat him within an inch of his life, tied him up to a fence, and left him for dead. Matthew was found barely alive, rushed to the hospital, and later passed away due to his extensive injuries. Due to this murder and another murder of James Byrd Jr. in 2009, the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act became law, which again strengthened hate crimes for the LGBTQ plus community. Matthew Shepard's mother, Judy, is now a motivational speaker and goes out and talks a lot about LGBTQ plus causes, and she and her husband do a lot for the LGBTQ plus community. What else we need to talk about on this one? 2011, Don't Ask, Don't Tell, it was repealed. In 2004, the Supreme Court strikes down the homosexual conduct law, decriminalizing same-sex conduct. And in 2016, we had Eric Fanning being named Secretary of a branch of the United States military, and he was the first openly gay male to be named into a position like that. A little bit more recent news. As I said, Stonewall Inn has become a national monument in 2016. Several people have been elected to offices. We had our first openly LGBT governor in Oregon in 2016. We had our first openly transgender candidate to the Virginia House of Delegates in 2017. We had our first openly transgender gubernatorial candidate in 2018. And then also in 2018, we had our first gay male elected as governor of Colorado. I think I'm going to skip this for now. I'll leave it in there. You can read over it because, again, I don't want to keep stepping on Noah's toes for tomorrow. But there's a lot of transgender rights that has happened from 2016 to 2019. And there's a lot of things in the current news right now going on with transgender rights. A lot of bills popping up all over the United States of bills trying to discriminate against the transgender population. Again, I don't want to take time in only the last 33 minutes or so that we have left to talk about that, since Noah will be talking more about transgender issues tomorrow. So, getting into the kind of starting to transition into the final part of this presentation. So, LGBTQ plus and employment. The U.S. Supreme Court heard, that should say heard, not here, gay rights cases in New York, Georgia, and Michigan. So this is a question, and you can cheat because I didn't do this slide correctly where it would only put this first 2 bullet points up first. Is it legal to fire someone just because of their sexual orientation or gender identity? Anybody? Did I put you all asleep?
I'm here. I'm just scared to answer the question.
Oh, okay. Well, the answer is it depends on where you live. So, for instance, there's 21 states in the District of Columbia that have laws that say that you cannot fire someone solely on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. 8 more states protect public employees only for sexual orientation and gender identity, and 4 states protect public employees only on sexual orientation. They don't protect gender identity. Arkansas's law on this is we are what is called a fire at will state. So we do not have any protection or laws for people that identify as LGBTQ+. Now, would an employer be bold enough to write on a termination slip fired because of being gay or transgender? Possibly, but I doubt it. I would probably guess that they would put something different, like unqualified for the job or not enough productivity. They'd probably use some other excuse instead of just showing how overtly discriminatory that they are being. But Arkansas does not have any laws protecting employment at this time. Noah.
I was just going to add to that, in Fayetteville and Eureka Springs had laws protecting people locally.
Yes.
Until the Arkansas Supreme Court ruled that they were not valid under the Arkansas Constitution.
Yes.
That was an ACLU case that I was a plaintiff on a couple of years ago.
Yeah. So several communities, Fayetteville, Eureka Springs, tried to pass it, saying, you know what, our city believes in equality. We are not going to allow employers to discriminate based off of sexual orientation, gender identity. But as Noah was saying, that went all the way to the Arkansas Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court struck those city ordinances down. I don't believe that battle is over, though. This is still a hot topic. And again, these cases that went from New York, Georgia, and Michigan that went to the Supreme Court, they were tabled. The justices felt like that there was not enough information to make a final decision. I am not a lawyer, I am not a politician, but I believe that there is a stipulation of how long something can be tabled when it has gone all the way to the Supreme Court. So I do not have the date of when that is supposed to come back up for further debate and talk, but I don't think it can just sit there forever. Because one of the articles that I read about this was saying that it might sit there for a year, but it will have to come back up within so many days or whatever. There's a rule that says it has to come back up in a certain amount of time. I just can't remember off the top of my head how long that time period is. All right. Any questions about employment? We're going to talk a little bit more about employment in a minute. So in the news, even more recently, conversion therapy now has been banned in 20 states and the District of Columbia. I double-checked that to make sure I had the most accurate information. North Carolina and Puerto Rico have partial bans for minors. In the American Psychological Association and other ones, there's the American Pediatrics Association as well. They do not support this type of treatment. And I put treatment in quotes because a lot of people that are practicing conversion therapy, they don't have a CRC, LPC. They don't have any formal training. It's very scary. There's a movie that was based off of someone that actually grew up here in Arkansas. He doesn't live in Arkansas anymore. I believe he lives in New York City now, called Boy Erased. And it actually shows a pretty accurate depiction of what conversion therapy looked like for him. And I have seen interviews with him of him saying how horrible of an experience it was for him. So if you have a CRC or an LPC and you practice conversion therapy, you're in jeopardy of losing your license if you're caught or losing your certification. So hopefully more states will get on board and ban this. I just saw, I think yesterday, that Germany banned conversion therapy in their country. So there's a lot of movement of more countries and states in the United States getting rid of this. There's also been a religious freedom and healthcare bill saying that medical professionals have the right to refuse services based off of their religious beliefs, and this could cause a lot of harm to the LGBTQ plus population. For some people that identify as LGBTQ plus, it's hard enough to find a doctor that they feel that they can open up to and be honest with about their sexual orientation or their gender identity. So this is still in the news right now. Also, the World Health Organization has removed, or will in their next version, gender identity disorder. In the DSM-5, we call that gender dysphoria. But World Health Organization is removing gender identity disorder as a mental health diagnosis. So in the ICD-11, it will appear as a gender incongruence in the sexual health chapter and not be in the mental health chapter at all. Again, I'm kind of stepping on Noah's toes because this is about the transgender community, but a lot of us mental health counselors and certified rehab counselors are wondering how this is going to change the way that services, medical services like hormones, gender confirmation surgery, things like that are done here in the United States if DSM follows suit. A lot of times when ICD-11 or ICD makes a change, then DSM in the next revision, they a lot of times follow suit. They may not on this issue, so don't quote me on that, but we do see a lot of congruence between the two manuals. So this will be something that anyone that is working with transgendered individuals needs to be paying attention to. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints reversed an LGBTQ plus rule, saying that children of LGBTQ plus parents can be baptized in the church. Same-sex couples are no longer considered apostolates and expelled from the church, but they're still not going to marry individuals of same sex. The Methodist Church is still going through a lot of debate right now about LGBTQ plus issues in their church. I am Methodist, so I've been keeping up with this. There is a ban still on same-sex marriage, and no clergy can be identified as LGBTQ plus in the Methodist Church. Several colleges and universities have disaffiliated with the United Methodist Church. And the church will go up for vote on possible division of the Methodist Church into a more conservative branch and a more liberal branch in May of 2020. But the last information I had on that, because I emailed my pastor yesterday, that conference has been postponed due to COVID-19. So he's not sure when that will be rescheduled at this time. So this issue probably is tabled for this time, but don't quote me on that, because he said he would keep me up to date as he gets more information. This has been, just since the COVID-19 pandemic, donation of plasma and blood is still an issue for LGBTQ plus people, especially gay men. April 2nd, 2020, the Federal Drug Administration reduced the no sex between two men from 12 months to 3 months. So if you can honestly go in and say that you haven't had sex with a man in 3 months, then they will allow gay men to donate blood now. In the past, it was 12 months. You couldn't have had sex with another man in 12 months. And even before that, there used to be a question on there, have you had sex with a man since 1973? And if you said yes, then you were rejected and told you couldn't give blood. So there's still a debate about this, why gay men are still having to be abstinent for 3 months when all the blood that is donated goes through extensive testing to make sure that there is no HIV, there's no any other communicable diseases that could be passed on to the person that needs the blood donation. So this is still an issue. COVID-19 also sent a lot of students home to possibly unsupportive home environments. I have been really worried about some of my students because being at college is their safe place. Being at home is a scary place for them because of the fact that their families don't support them as they are starting to come out and identify as their true sexual orientation or their true gender identity. So I've been concerned and been reaching out to some of my students during this time. And the last one here is the U.S. Supreme Court is going to hear a case of same-sex parents in foster care in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The city of Philadelphia was not sending foster kids to a particular foster agency of the Catholic organization, because that Catholic organization said that they would not allow same-sex couples to be foster parents. And that did not line up with the city of Philadelphia's beliefs. They believe that any eligible foster parent should be allowed to have foster children. And so this is going all the way up to the Supreme Court for a decision. There is no date as of when I looked at this the other day of when that will happen. And this is, we're kind of wrapping up here with the current events. Equality Act was introduced in 2015. It had bipartisan support. This would clarify civil rights laws apply to people with that identify as a sexual orientation or gender identity minority, and would protect other people of color, women, and religious minorities in all of the following areas there: employment, housing, education, credit, federal funding, etc. Unfortunately, the current administration is opposed to this legislation. The House passed this bill in May 17th of 2019, and it did stall in the Senate. So we will see if this gets any momentum in the future. But right now, with everything going on with COVID-19, I don't see it happening anytime soon. Okay, so we're transitioning here. We have about 20 minutes left. Any questions before we transition into part 3 here? Okay. So when we talk about people with disabilities that also identify as LGBTQ+, there's a lot more out there than we probably know. Because again, not all of our clients are going to identify or disclose to us about their personal lives if they don't feel that they can trust us, if they don't feel like we are an ally. So in a recent study by Asher in 2018, he found that 30% of males and 36% of females identify as LGBTQ+ and a person with a disability. There is a higher chance that people who identify as both a person with a disability and LGBTQ+ may experience discrimination. So they can experience this discrimination on two different levels. One, being a person with a disability, and two, being a person who identifies as LGBTQ+. So that brings us to a concept called intersectionality. So the definition of intersectionality is the theory that overlaps of various social identities as race, gender, sexuality, and class, and contributes to specific types of systemic oppression and discrimination experienced by an individual. So this is, I gave you a couple of examples down here at the bottom. So we have an Asian male who identifies as asexual and also as a person with cerebral palsy. So for instance, with that, he could be discriminated against on three different levels. One, because he's an Asian male. Two, because he identifies as something other than straight, he identifies as asexual. And three, he is a person with cerebral palsy. The second example, African American transgender woman who is diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. So we have how many there? African American transgender woman who is diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. We have race, African American. We have gender, woman. We have gender identity, she's transgender. And she's a person with a disability. She has multiple sclerosis. So 4 different levels of possible discrimination there. Any questions about intersectionality? Y'all are so quiet. Okay. So the Human Rights Campaign is a huge organization that does a lot of research, does a lot of advocacy. There is a local branch of Human Rights Campaign pretty much in every state of the 50 states. Arkansas has a chapter in Little Rock. You can call them, and if they can fit it in their schedule, they'll come to your office, they'll come to your campus. They will come and do educational presentations to help people understand how to work with people of different sexual orientations and people with different gender identities. So in this youth survey, they found that 77% of LGBTQ plus teenagers had mental health issues such as feeling depressed or down over the past week, had trouble sleeping, 95% reported that. LGBT youth of color and transgender teenagers experienced even more unique challenges of elevated stress due to some of those intersectionalities that we talked about. And over 50% of trans and gender expansive youth said they can never use the school restroom that aligns with their gender identity for fear of bullying or violence. More than 70% reported feelings of worthlessness and helplessness in the past week. And 26% said they always felt safe in their school classrooms. Or only 26% said that they felt safe in their school classrooms. And 5% said that they that all of their teachers and school staff were supportive of them being a person of the LGBTQ plus community. And 67% said that they had family members that have made negative comments about them being part of the LGBTQ plus community. Again, this is why it's important for us as CRCs, as counselors, to be an ally. A lot of our clients are going to come in and they haven't had a lot of support. They may not have it at home. They may not have it in If they're working, they may not have it in their current workplace. Maybe that's why they're coming to see you, because they need it. They need to transition into some other type of work, because where they are right now, it's not working. And hopefully they, if they are a person that identifies as LGBTQ plus and has a disability, then they are able to make that switch pretty easily. As we all know, as CRC, sometimes finding people a work environment in general, being a person with a disability, can be difficult, depending on their physical need, depending on their emotional need. Yeah, I'll get here. Thank you, Peggy, for that question. I'll get to that here in just a second. So if we're not there to support them, then we need to think about that. So Peggy gave me a question here, or asked me if I could give some tips on how to pick up on this depression when we talk to clients, and how we can come alongside them and earn their trust. Okay, so as CRCs, hopefully you know the general identifiers of depression. If you don't, then I can provide some resources of just some general things to look for. When people are saying that their sleep habits have changed, they're either sleeping a lot or they're not sleeping at all. If their eating habits have changed, they report that they're eating everything in the cupboard, or they haven't been eating hardly at all. They appear to be sad when they come and talk to you. They're expressing that they feel worthless, that they feel sad all the time. Those are signs that you might need to either refer, if you do not feel like that is in your area of expertise, or you're not licensed to work with somebody with depressive symptoms, then you may need to make a referral to a mental health counselor. If you are duly licensed and certified like I am, and you have that capability of treating the depression as well, then do so. My number one thing is, if you're worried about a client, go talk to your supervisor and say, hey, something doesn't feel right with this client. Hopefully you have a supervisor that you have that relationship with, that you can go to and say, hey, the client came in today for our meeting, for our counseling session, and they didn't seem like themselves. Like, something's up. And I tried to ask, some good open-ended questions, tried to figure out what was going on, but I didn't get anywhere. So can you give me some advice? Can you give me some pointers? Hopefully you have that relationship. I have been very fortunate when I worked in the field to have very supportive supervisors when I came to stuff like that and wasn't really sure where to turn. But again, if it's out of your wheelhouse, if you are not licensed as a mental health provider in your state, then you may need to talk to your supervisor and talk to that client of making a mental health referral. Just saying, hey, I'd like for you just to go get screened and make sure that we're not dealing with depression right now. Because that's the last thing we need right now, is for you to get depressed, and then it's going to interfere with the goals that we have set. So if we can, get that treatment going as well, then we can be more successful for meeting your goals of going back to school and getting that degree, or getting placed in that job that you want to be placed in, or whatever the goal is. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Noah, do you want to chime in?
Are you finished with what you were saying?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was just going to share from the other end of things that I was working for the University of Michigan when I started my transition, and I was seeing one of the staff counselors there because of mental health issues.
Right.
And she was able to refer me to somebody who ultimately helped me with my transition before I was even talking about transitioning, really. And so knowing who in the community is available to support people with that kind of thing is really valuable.
Yes. I thank you for that. That is true. And if you go, if like here in, it doesn't matter what state you work in, if you go to Psychology Today, and you do the counselor search, you can actually search for LGBTQ plus affirming counselors in your area. So if you have a client that is presenting with possible mental health issues, but you want to take that extra step of making sure you make a good referral, of making sure that you refer to a counselor that is LGBTQ plus knowledgeable and friendly, then that is very important. I I'll self-disclose, I am a gay male if you haven't already figured that out. I don't think I shared that earlier. And from time to time, ever since I came out, I have gone to therapy myself. I think it's very healthy for us counselors to go and get therapy when we need it as well, because if we're not healthy, how the hell are we going to help our clients? And how the hell am I going to help my students if I'm not healthy? And that has been very important to me, is finding an LGBTQ plus friendly counselor. No offense to any other counselors out there, I'm sure they would have done a great job, but I prefer to work with somebody that hopefully is LGBTQ plus too, but if not, is someone that is what I call a super ally, someone that knows the community inside and out and has worked with a bunch of clients that identify as LGBTQ plus. So that resource is a really good resource. Psychology Today, you don't have to be a member of the American Counseling Association to look at that website. If you just Google Psychology Today, counselor search, then you can actually do a free search, and it will pop up if there's any mental health counselors in your area that specifically identify as an LGBTQ plus ally or expert. In our area here in Arkansas where I live, it's pretty rural, so we don't have a lot of options that identify that way, but surprisingly we do have a couple in this area that have listed themselves as a LGBTQ plus affirming counselor in even this small rural area of the state that I'm in. So that would be a great resource. So thank you, Noah, for that as well. All right, we have about 7 minutes, and I want to make sure we leave a few minutes for questions. So when you're working with people who identify as LGBTQ plus and people with disabilities, get to know the person without any preconceived thoughts or assumptions. So if you assume that you know things, then you're probably going to make a mistake. So don't assume that just because somebody appears to be very out and proud that they're going to need to talk to you about their sexuality or gender identity. They may be coming to talk to you about, I need employment, or I want to go back to school, and I was born with a disability, and I'm hoping that maybe vocational rehab can help me achieve this goal. So don't make that assumption. Don't make the counseling session all about their sexuality or their gender identity, because that may not be what they need to talk about. If it is, great, talk to them about that. But don't make that assumption. A lot of new counselors make that assumption. Oh, okay, well, they're a gay client, so we're going to have to talk about gay issues. Not everything in life that they're going to need help with is going to necessarily be that it revolves around LGBTQ plus issues. If you're not sure about something, ask or educate yourself. It's very important to refer to the client by the terminology they prefer, so use the correct pronouns. And I like to use person first language unless somebody corrects me. So my client who identifies as a gay male, or instead of my gay client. Some people don't like that because they feel just like people with disabilities. A lot of people with disabilities feel. I'm a person first. If somebody called me the gay professor, I wouldn't like that. I am a professor who happens to be gay. I am a counselor who happens to be gay, but it doesn't affect my job because of my personal life. Then also use appropriate supervision. If you're uncomfortable with the client, go talk to your supervisor. We are not supposed to do harm. So if you don't feel like you can do the job, then you need to go and talk about that. This comes from a textbook about career counseling by Zucker, and he says there's 6 stages of working with career counseling. And again, I don't know that we really need to go over all this because we've talked about a lot of this stuff already. But again, it says down there at the bottom, you can't force people to change. So it's that next to last one there, LGBT persons who attend counseling without a desire to change their sexual orientation should not be forced into change. So again, not letting your personal beliefs, moral values affect the counseling relationship. And the more affirming you can be, the better it will be with the client. All right, so that is pretty much my presentation. We have about 5 minutes left. And those are just some of my final thoughts there. We've talked about a lot of this already. So what questions can I answer in this last 5 minutes? Is there anything that you need clarified? Anything that you have comments on? I feel like I should have the Jeopardy music playing right now. Okay, thank you for that. Comment of no questions, but found the presentation helpful, so I appreciate that.
It was a very good presentation. Thank you. I enjoyed it. This is Peggy.
Oh, thank you, Peggy.
Learned a lot.
Good.
I'm looking forward to the one tomorrow.
So
I agree.
Go
This
ahead.
is Tanya. Sorry, I agree. Very good information. Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, no problem. Anytime. And if y'all have any questions that you didn't feel comfortable asking in front of the group, I am more than welcome for y'all to email me. I can make sure that Peggy and Kevin will share my email out if it's not already out. And also in the PowerPoint, these last 3 slides, they have some of the resources that I was talking about. One of these 3 links right here is the one that has the videos that I was talking about attached with each of the definitions. If these hyperlinks don't work on the PowerPoint, let me know, and I'll be glad to send those again in a different email. But these glossary terms are really good. That's where a lot of that terminology on those first few slides came from. And then I also have just some web resources of major LGBTQ plus support information from web resources. And the last slide has specific resources for Arkansas. I know not everybody that is a participant is from Arkansas. If you need specific resources in your state, you can also email me if you're having trouble finding them, and I'll be glad to do a Google search and help you find local resources in your state if you still need that. All right, we have about 2 minutes. Any final thoughts? Well, I appreciate you all taking the time out of your day to be here today. And I'm glad that the feedback that I'm getting is that you're going to have something to take away from this that will help you as you work with your future clients that may identify as LGBTQ+. So appreciate it. And like I said, feel free to email me. If you have anything, I'll just go ahead and type it in the chat real quick. That way you'll have it if you want to, and then we can also get it to you later if you need it. So there's my email address if anybody needs to contact me directly. All right, thank you all.
Thank you, Doctor.